Hello, everyone. I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Thank you for joining us for another 30-minute skills. For those joining us for the first time, welcome. These monthly lessons are a quick and efficient way to hone your reporting skills and build on your First Amendment knowledge. But as most of you know, they are more than that. They're a way for you to reconnect with a community of journalists, researchers, attorneys, and academics who regularly attend these lessons. To everyone, please use the chat to introduce yourself, showcase your own work, and connect with others. Also, make sure to register for our upcoming lessons such as covering marginalized communities. We have a two-part writing workshop. We also have Broadcast Journalism 101. These lessons are all coming up. Registration links for them can be found at nefac.org. Previous 30-minute skills are available at nefac.org as well, and on our YouTube channel, 5 Freedoms. Today's presentation will focus on business reporting, and it's supported in part by the estate of Gloria L. Negri. Gloria was a trailblazing journalist at the Boston Globe for more than 50 years. This program is part of her legacy of newsroom education and her lifelong commitment to local journalism. You can learn more about Gloria and other NEFAC supporters at nefac.org/supporters. During today's presentation, I again encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat and share your own experiences and resources. You can also use the chat or the Q&A button to ask questions of your instructor. We'll get to as many of those questions as possible. We have a lot to cover and not a lot of time, so let's get started. Alexa, all yours.
Sure. Hi, all. I'm Alexa Gagosz. I'm a business reporter at the Boston Globe's Rhode Island Bureau. I cover anything and everything from housing and homelessness to restaurants and our tourism sector and the hospitality industry to healthcare and hospital management. So we're going to go to the next slide. This is my favorite question, like, why is business reporting so important? And if you were to ask me when I was in college or grad school, and you said, what do you want to cover and what do you want to be when you grow up? I would have probably said, I want to be a congressional reporter. I want to be a reporter in the White House. I want to cover what policy changes are taking effect and how those decisions by lawmakers are impacting everyday Americans. That didn't happen. I graduated from grad school at Northeastern in the middle of lockdown in 2020 and was hired at a weekly business paper here in Providence, Rhode Island. And after getting laid off after 6 months, I joined the Boston Globe's Rhode Island Bureau, where I continue to cover business and breaking news. And over time, especially in the last 4 years, I truly have this belief that everyone is a business reporter at the end of the day. Politics and policy touch a lot of stories, but most stories relate back to business, to finance, to the interworkings of business and government. So one example I bring up to everybody is COVID-19. You know, the pandemic was just one big business story after another. You had lots of numbers flying around, from the number of deaths to funding for restaurants and hospitals, health clinics, about where that money was going, and then the oversight about how that money was being spent. And if you were a healthcare reporter at any point during the pandemic or afterwards, you always wanted to look to see who owns these hospitals, who owns these health clinics. Are they for profit or are they nonprofit? And what does that even mean? How does it change their operations? And also, why does that matter to patients, to a general audience? And, you know, when we're looking at inspection records, where some of my best stories come from, you're really looking at how these healthcare systems are operating. You might be looking at government funding for those systems to stay afloat during the pandemic and afterwards. You might be looking at PPP loans. You might have talked to union leaders or unionized workers. You might also be looking at the different places in which business touches, in one way or another, government. So while there are reporters that cover politics, they also cover business in a lot of places. So if you write about restaurants, you're a business reporter. If you write about healthcare, you're a business reporter. If you write about offshore wind and the environment, you're a business reporter at the end of the day. It's about the decisions that leaders, business leaders, CEOs are making and how it affects their workers and everyday people. So we're going to go to the next slide. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to take you through some of my top tips of whatever I do whenever I'm swarming a company. Tip number 1 is all about finding sources. Private companies constantly seem like they are impenetrable until the moment that they are not. So I want you to be looking for an inroad from multiple angles. Look for people on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky about where they work. They could be current employees or former employees. All of them are potential sources. Also look at Zoom info, look at court records and attorneys. Sometimes attorneys you might not think can talk, but sometimes they're the best on background sources. They can also point you to a direction of who you should actually talk to next. Look at 911 calls. Look at news clips to see who's been quoted in the past, who's currently being quoted. Contact all of them. You want to look at LexisNexis. Look at their public searches there and see where these people live, where their kids might go to school. See if the decisions that they're making at their company, their nonprofit organization, or elsewhere is going to impact them and their families personally, if it impacts them at all. So cast a really wide net. Next. When you start interacting with one of these companies, you want to go beyond the spokesperson at all times. And you want to ask for interviews, not just with the CEO and the executive director of a company or nonprofit, but you also want to go to the C-suite. Some of your best stories someday might be a vice president that you didn't think to reach out to, or that you didn't think had a really important job initially, and they could give you a massive scoop someday, whether it's when they're still there or when they leave. You also want to talk to the union workers, see what it's like to work there. Talk to the union presidents or leaders. Talk to organizers who will connect you with dozens of people, especially if you're reporting on like a healthcare system or hospital network, nursing home. This is just one example, but it really works in all cases. I also highly recommend that you read all the boring reports that nobody else does. These are governmental reports. They're university reports with plenty of study experts and authors. Some of these author reports at local universities might actually know the people that they're studying all the time, meaning on a personal level. They might be professors or researchers that have developed a good relationship with workers. And if you develop a good relationship with them as well, you never know if you're going to get a really good scoop or tip from that professor down the road. Some of my best scoops from hospitals actually came from professors who just study these places and are observers. So we're going to go to the next. Tip number 2, you're going to craft an outreach message that you're comfortable with company management reading. So even if you're connecting with employees, whether they're current or former employees on LinkedIn, which I don't always recommend, but sometimes you don't really have a choice, or through personal email addresses, work email addresses, just assume that executives will read that email at some point. So make it really basic. Introduce yourself, say you're working on a story that involves X industry, and you're looking for former and current employees at this company to hear about their experiences. Make it very, very basic, very, very broad. Send your cell phone number, ask for a good time that you guys could just connect on a 10-minute phone call. And you want that to be like a super introductory phone call. You don't want to say, oh, I'm looking into or I'm investigating X just yet. You just want to really introduce yourself, talk about the stories that you've written about a business before or written about this industry before, and kind of keep it an open line of communication. Tell them, hey, at any point, that you hear about something that's coming out, like, please feel free to send it to me, even if you think that it's not a news story. And then keep a spreadsheet of every single person you've ever reached out to, whether they've answered or not. Keep a tally of every time you talk to them. Keep a tally of all of their contact information, how long they've been at the company, their title, if they've been promoted, etc. You want all of that in one place. You don't want to be searching for it at all the time. Also, when you do talk to them, constantly ask, is there anyone else that you think I should talk to? They're not going to just think like a reporter does and like, oh, these are 5 people you have to talk to. They're not going to think like that. You have to actually pose the question. And even if they say, oh, I don't know right now, they might know down the road, or they might connect with some of their colleagues or former colleagues and say, hey, I know this reporter, they're looking to talk to former or current employees. You should talk to them. So just put it out there. You have to say it out loud. Next. Okay. So unfortunately, you cannot FOIA companies as much as I would love to. It would probably make all of our jobs as business reporters or reporters in general very easy. But you need to think about all the touch points about where that company might interact with the government, whether that's local, state, or federal agencies. Next. These are just really, really easy but critical records that you should get for any company that you are reporting on. I know that there are some Connecticut reporters on here, and I think that many of us are covering like the same story. For example, Prospect Medical Holdings, which is the owner of several different hospitals around the country. Here, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, they did own in Delaware, California, etc. They just filed bankruptcy, so like this is top of mind for me. I had FOIA'd a long time ago for their FTC complaints. I highly recommend that everybody do that. These complaints, which is at the bottom of this list, it's going to take a little time for you to get, and usually they're anonymous when you do get them or the names are redacted, but you can just kind of get a gist of what people are complaining about. Sometimes it's like overbilling for medical services, etc., just to get a gist of what you're looking for. Sometimes it's by vendors who are saying, this company has not paid me in years for supplies, etc. So sometimes these companies owe debt, and just for you to have a general understanding of that debt or understanding of the breadth of what's going on is really helpful when you're first starting to look into a company. So FTC complaints is one of my number one things that I do whenever I'm first starting to look into a company. Also, government contracts. If there are contracts, find the original bids on public projects. Did the company live up to the terms of that contract if the project is completed? Was the company actually the lowest and best bid? And if they're not, then you're going to want to APRA in Rhode Island or FOIA in other places, request these records of emails, memos, any written communication about this company around the time that the bid was awarded. Sometimes you never know what you're going to get. If they're getting state and federal grants, this is the case for a lot of nonprofit entities, like such as homelessness service providers, shelter providers, then audits are likely required. So check the federal audit clearinghouse for federal grants, including state pass-through programs. How are they managing the money? And trust me, they don't manage the money properly a lot of the time. You're also going to want to request emails with city officials and state departments, depending on what you're looking for. One really, really easy thing to find is, do they owe back taxes? In Connecticut, Prospect Medical Holdings owes millions upon millions of dollars in back taxes, for instance, which was broke by one of the Connecticut outlets, and everyone else has followed as well. So that is something that I would definitely ask for. That's really easy to get. Just reach out to a municipal financial director or tax assessor and ask. Every town is different, so you're just gonna have to send like a big email chain. And they're usually pretty good about getting that information quickly. If you don't hear back, within a day or so, just realize that these are usually overworked, town employees. So, just be kind, give them a nudge, and you'll get your information. Get calls for service lists for companies' addresses, 911 responses made to businesses if you can, see who was quoted in reports, what went down. Look for inspection reports for hospitals, healthcare clinics, restaurants, university cafeterias, the whole gamut. Look at OSHA's establishment search, find building permits, deeds and property records, and then warn notices with local labor departments. So if a company is laying off, I think it's more than 50 employees, then they have to send a warn notice to the state. And a warn notice that's federally mandated. But you don't want to just write the story about, 50 employees or 100 employees were laid off from Aetna or CVS. Aetna is owned by CVS. You want to also ask for the actual letter that the company sent to DLT, because you want to know who exactly is getting laid off. You want to know when they're getting laid off. You want to know who sent the letter, because at some point they could be a potential source. You want to collect all of that information. So I want you to think of all of these records as, this might not be a daily story for me today or this week, but this is the information that I have to collect for any single business that I'm looking into whatsoever. Next slide. Tip number 4, internal records. This is the most critical thing that you can get as a business reporter. Use my favorite little phrase, is there anything you can show me related to this matter or issue? So you want to get copies of emails, financial statements, announcements to employees, newsletters from CEOs, even if you think it's like riddled with PR, just get your hands on it, etc. You want to know what these leaders are thinking or doing at all times as much as possible. And because they're not going to tell you all the time or send you a tip or an email, you want to get all of this internal communication. But do not have any of your sources create documents for you. That's incredibly important. The one thing that I have had happen, especially for private companies, is some of my sources will tell me there's a town meeting or a company meeting going on, and the CEO is going to announce something. We don't know what it is, but they're making some type of announcement. You could have them, if they're comfortable, record that meeting. Now, if they have only a work provided cell phone, that they might be compromised there. They might get in trouble there. So you want to make sure what kind of cell phone that they have. And this is at their own risk. You can't convince them to do this. It's at their own will. But I've had some really great stories come out of tips that I got from audio recordings. So again, people aren't going to think, oh, I should just do that. They might just think, unlike a reporter, I'll just get on the phone and tell them what the CEO said in the meeting, which is great. But if you can get the audio recording, it's so much better. Also, get annual reports or impact reports from the company. These are usually really, really flashy. A marketing agency probably put them together. They're riddled with PR word salad, but look at the footnotes. This is sometimes where you can find donors, financial information, sometimes additional sources, etc. Next. Next slide. Thank you. Tip 5, so earnings calls and transcripts. So for private companies, there are regular earnings calls and transcripts that can easily be found on their website. So you want to look at their investor pages, mark them on your calendar ahead of time. They usually announce them like more than a month in advance. Register to attend them, and they contain really great audio from executives and analysts. This works great if you're in radio or TV, so you can just kind of grab that audio, but you can also find out if a company is making a big move through these calls. So for example, CVS, they're based right in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. So they're part of my beat. I cover them and kind of anything that they're doing. CVS will announce that they're divesting from one of their subsidiaries on these calls. They might discuss a change in leadership, even the CEO, or even say that they are closing hundreds of stores, like they did a few years ago when they announced that they were closing 900 stores over the course of 3 years. So you don't have to wait for someone like Bloomberg or CNBC to report it first. You can break that news, and that's kind of how I did. Another example, sometimes you can better understand the lingo, their financial challenges, outside challenges of a company just by listening to these earnings calls. This is usually a time when they are trying to show off to investors, but also at the same time explain why they have losses of any kind. It might be because they have too much inventory, it might be because of regulations that they're blaming, such as like the COVID regulations a couple of years ago, or it might be other current events. So one example, if you're in Rhode Island, you know that the Washington Bridge is one of the biggest stories in the state and has been for more than a year now. And Bally's, which is the casino owner here, blames the Washington Bridge getting shut down on why they lost millions of dollars. So like that's a story right there, or it's part of a bigger story. Seeking Alpha is one great system that you can use for free to kind of get these earnings calls and transcripts, but usually they're right on a company's website, so super easy to obtain. If IT has access to Bloomberg Terminal, use that. I have one really easy tip if you're in the Boston area or you can get to Boston easily. Boston Public Library has access to this right in the basement, so go use it for free. Otherwise, it's really expensive. Look through the Edgar search on the SEC's website for securities filings. Look for bond reports and meetings. A lot of hospitals will have bond reports and meetings. And sometimes they'll just literally send you a link to the Zoom for these meetings. I usually have no trouble. Next slide.
Real quick, Alexa, just to clarify for some of our audience, when you're talking about earnings calls, these are for public companies, not private companies, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for catching my typo. All right, and that's actually what I just said, so we're going to go to the next slide as well. All right, so if you are a reporter and you're not using advanced Google search at this point, you're not using Google to your advantage. And I know this sounds so silly, like I know how to use Google, but if you're just going to google.com and then searching like Alexa Gagosz, you're gonna find like what the algorithm sends you. So go to advanced Google search, filter by site type like .gov, .org, filter by file type such as a PDF. I actually really encourage all of you to leave here at some point and go to advanced Google search and then search your own name in quotations. So like, for example, mine would be Alexa Gagosz in quotations, and then search by PDF and see just like where you've been cited. One of my favorite things is that my work about homelessness, my coverage about homelessness was cited in a Supreme Court case. So I think that things like that is like where you can actually find some of your nitty gritty stuff. Sometimes it's financial reports, sometimes it's announcements, etc. But you never know what you're going to be able to find. So make sure you put like very specific names, including company names, CEO names in quotation marks, and then try different formats as well. So for example, my first name, Alexa Gagosz, and then try it again as Gagosz, comma, Alexa. That's where you're going to be able to find citations and academic papers that these folks have written for PhDs or masters, or where they've been cited. Sometimes you're going to see them in books, like in, an index or in a bibliography, etc. Also, I set up Google alerts for people and companies all the time. I think I have like 50 Google alerts set up right now, and it's kind of obnoxious. I constantly get updates. But if you're really trying to track, say, the CEO of Prospect Medical Holdings or the governor or, the leader or administrator of a nursing home, you're going to want to find out every time they've been mentioned on the internet. You never know what you're going to find. Also, start every single morning with a quick Google search. I do this for CVS. I just put CVS News or CVS and see like what they're up to. You never know. Hasbro is another one, the toy company. So you just really never know what you're going to get. Next slide. And then check these other places for ideas. FOIA reading rooms for federal agencies like the FBI. You never know what you can find. You just kind of like search through. Use Muckrock. I use Muckrock for all of my FOIA requests except in Rhode Island. And I think I put in a FOIA request every single day, if not more than one per day. They follow up for you. It's free. It's just one of the best websites ever. Bookmark it, use it. I highly recommend it. Open Corporate's website, but make sure to verify everything that you see on there. Public pension funds, so request records detailing investment proposals, vetting and viewing of pension board and records, tracking performances of investments. And then the ICIJ has a great database of offshore companies. Some of those might be tied to private companies. Make sure to verify everything of these. But it's just a good place for you to kind of like when you're swarming a company to get all of the information that you can and possibly use it at another date, or just continue your reporting and research using some of these documents that are really easy to get. Next. And just how to drive coverage. I think this is, for me at least, one of the most important things. At the Globe's Rhode Island Bureau, we certainly don't try to be the paper of record. There's already a paper of record here in Rhode Island. So we want to find where the holes in existing coverage are, what might be being overlooked, who might be being overlooked, such as those who are being impacted by these issues in the business world. Build a calendar of earnings calls of, if you're covering development, make sure that you have like every single town's planning board meetings that you want to kind of keep track of, like on your calendar for the year. They usually post a list of the meeting dates in January, all of those things. Get in the habit of asking sources for scoops and exclusives. I do this constantly. I say, oh, you're sending out a press release, then I don't really care. I want the exclusive. I want the scoop. I want it first. And I want it like 24 hours ahead of time first. Just be more proactive in thinking about the news of the day. Don't just react to everything. I think this is so important, and it really distincts you from everybody else, from all the other press out there. Also, go to places that others haven't or won't. I cover homelessness. I've embedded myself into homeless shelters for a week at a time, and nobody else had done that, especially at that length of time in Rhode Island in so long. And it really helped me make a name for myself. Next. And that is it. Thank you so much. And I hope that you all have questions.
Great. Thank you, Alexa. Appreciate it. A lot of really good information here. And reminder to everybody that we'll share Alexa's slides with the video when we post it. One question here before we wrap up. It's going back to one of your first suggestions about looking at 911 calls. Alexa, can you elaborate on what that looks like, what kind of information you get from 911 calls, and how you get the calls themselves? Because the laws might differ. The Freedom of Information laws might differ state to state.
They will totally differ from state to state, and I wish that I was as well versed on all of the public records laws as maybe you yourself are, but I am not. And I came from Connecticut, where I feel like it's pulling teeth right now to get certain things that are mundane and easy from my hometown for a project I'm working on personally, let alone just some of the things that I'm working on in Rhode Island. 911 calls, I mean, try to establish a relationship with the chief of police, and just like ask, I'm looking for any 911 calls related to this address over this period of time. And you know what? There are a lot of these police departments that are just completely overrun, and, they're very tiny. If you think about like your most rural area of Connecticut or Vermont, that's going to be really challenging to get quickly. But in Providence, this should be fairly simple. And you might just get a list of the 911 calls. You might not get anything, but it's just part of the reporting reporting process of like everything that you might be able to find. One example is like I just requested some 911 calls to a nightclub that I was looking into the ownership of, and the only calls for service that were there were for alarms. So it was not exciting or sexy whatsoever, but it's just part of the reporting process. You're not going to find, like the next great spotlight story at every corner. So you just kind of have to ask and look, but you never know.
Great. Thank you. And I would direct everybody to nfac.org. We have an excellent FOI guide there with a ton of information about all of the public record laws in New England, including a number of video tutorials that really start you off from scratch, work your way up, teach you the whole body of law, including police records and 911 calls. So definitely check that out. Alexa, thank you so much for this lesson. We learned a ton. Really grateful for your time and having you here. And want to thank everybody as well for joining us today. Again, we provide these lessons as a public service to you. So please return the favor, encourage your colleagues and friends to join us each month. We all have a lot to learn from each other, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. On behalf of NEFAC, thank you. Thank you for all you do, and we'll see you next month for our next 30-minute skills. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, guys.